And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Robert Pictou. According to the Destination BC website, Highway 16 is listed as one of the top 5 scenic drives in BC. With glimpses of tall waterfalls trickling down the mountains, the 45-kilometer stretch between Terrace and Prince Rupert curves along the Skeena River. We open up our archives to bring you this story from 1989.
Some of those challenges thrown at the motoring public on the highway come from Mother Nature. Today there's poor visibility because of the fog. Other times it's heavy rains or high winds whipping up the valley. And then sometimes it gets much more serious, such as when powerful avalanches roar off the mountainsides, pretty much obliterating whatever's in their path, as happened twice last winter on this stretch of Highway 16. But along with the continually changing challenges of nature, motorists also face challenges that have their origins with man, such as the physical state of the highway, its construction, its maintenance, and its design.
This corner here being the car wash, 50-kilometer zone. Sat here for 2 hours last winter when that man died, when the ice fell on him. I don't know what they're going to do about it. As you can tell, there's still water falling all through there.
Car Wash Rock, as it's often referred to, might also be called, during the winter months, Icefall Rock. It's a tight corner, snugged up against a large, overhanging rock bluff. Water often runs off the rock onto the highway below. In winter, the water turns to ice, and when it falls onto the highway, the results can be fatal. Last March, a Prince Rupert man died when, by quirk of fate, his truck struck a chunk of rock-hard ice just as it was falling from the cliff. That fatality prompted the Terrace Corner to call for safety improvements at Car Wash Rock. The Highways Ministry has responded with short-term and long-term solutions.
The short-term fix, if you want to call it that, is basically to develop some sort of a drainage system up at the top. Basically what we'll have to do is to blast a rock ditch right at the top of the bluff to pick up some of that moisture that is basically flowing down over the top of the rock and freezing and forming those large ice deposits at the top. What we're trying to do is to channel that water off to the side where it can be, where it can run away in a less affected area for the highway. So that's the short-term solution, and we're basically in the final stages of setting that up right now, and we hope to have that completed within the next month.
Buckle says their long-term goal at Car Wash Rock is to eventually reroute the highway away from the rock face. A little further west on the highway from Car Wash Rock, Joe Orango encounters some highway reconstruction work.
Oh, this is going to be a little rough.
Actually, the road bed is much smoother than it was just a few days previous. Then CFTK's First News carried a report showing drivers trying to contend with a thick, soupy mixture of water-saturated sand.
Since that last newscast, what a difference it has made out here.
Is that right?
Unbelievable.
Why is that?
These guys have got off their ass and went to work. Not meaning the construction companies, more as the government has got off their butts and are starting to do something about it.
What crews had to do about it was scrape all the mud off the highway and lay down a new layer of fill. The first layer of fill was the wrong kind. It was too fine, and when it mixed with steady rains, the result was a heavy, sandy stew.
We're still looking into exactly what happened as to how the material ended up being so high in fines. The material that they were supposedly accessing was a normal crushed gravel, to the best of our knowledge. So until our testing people can advise us exactly what happened to it and why it wasn't the material that we understood it was, we really have to wait for that information.
The corner being worked on is often called 30 Mile. It's about 30 miles west of Terrace. It's a dangerous S-bend in the road, that the terrace coroner once said was good for about a death a year. The Highways Department is improving the corner, but it's taking longer than planned. What started out as a one-year project has turned into a two-year project.
The scope of the project at various times was laid out. We then had a change in organization. We had changes in staff in our district. We also had funding limitations at a district level that required that project be phased in over 2 years as opposed to one. We reviewed the design this year and decided that we were going to modify what was originally being proposed. So we wanted to make a choice to not go to the full Cadillac treatment for that particular job, but rather construct it to improve it for the time being, recognizing it wouldn't be in place for the long term. So that design revision required us to go to an alternate design, which did take up some time.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. A kilovolt is a unit of potential energy equal to 1,000 volts. Let us return to the archives as I mentioned when traffic on Highway 16 used to pass underneath a 230 kilovolt tower.
If Car Wash Rock and 30 Mile Corner are safety hazards on the highway, the section between the Kayaks River and Tyee overpass is a downright threat. Where the highway bends around and under a transmission tower is a familiar landmark. It's a hazardous spot at the best of times, but if you have the misfortune to meet a large transport truck just as you're heading under the tower, the danger is magnified, and safe drivers slow to a crawl or even a dead stop to negotiate the tower. Even professional drivers have trouble with the hazard.
Why the highway was ever built like this, you can't fit two of these rigs through here at one time. It's been proven, lots of damage.
The transmission tower is just one hazard along the highway between the Kayaks River and the Tyee overpass. Indeed, the entire 8 kilometers can be fairly described as a hazard. It's referred to as the Tyee Narrows, because with the railway on one side and the river on the other, what remains for the highway is narrow, sometimes almost too narrow. When the big rigs bypass each other on some stretches of the road, the safe drivers slow right down to reduce the chances of a sideswipe accident. Navigating the narrow road when it's in good condition is tough enough, but for the past couple years, the challenge has been increased by pavement pitted with potholes, bumps, and cracks.
I usually don't stay in my lane here, 'cause it ain't good enough. Neither is this. There, see, that's what has to be done for guys to fit through here. This is a bad spot. Now, if you shot out your mirror there, you would see how close things are. I sure hope we don't have to travel this road this winter again. That was real scary last year.
Actually, with any luck, Joe Arango and all the other motorists traveling the highway this winter won't have to put up with the Tyee Narrows. At least not if everything goes as planned by Highway Department officials. Because within a month or two, we should be traveling on the new widened roadbed, and the Narrows will be a thing of the past.
By and large, we're looking at 2-lane all the way through there. It's very similar to the section beyond the Cox-Aberdeen portion where you've got the widened paved shoulder, the full 90-kilometer-an-hour design. The intention this winter is to get what we call our asphalt stabilized base course down on the whole project.
If it seems like construction crews have been working on the Tyee kayak section of the road for a long time, it's because they have. Well over a year longer than was first planned. Talk of the road widening project first began in the early 80s, but it wasn't until the spring of 1987 that construction plans for the 10-kilometer stretch were drawn up. In the summer of that year, The ministry received 13 bids for the contract to widen the highway, and in September 1987, Williamson Brothers Construction, the low bidder at $2.9 million, began work. The project was to be complete by late 1988. In October 1987, the ministry let a second contract to make improvements in the swampy area between Aberdeen Creek and Kayaks River. Leadcore Industries was a successful low bidder at $4.3 million. In December 1987, things took a turn for the worse. Williamson Brothers stopped work on its portion of the project. Officials said there was confusion with the contract. The confusion couldn't be cleared up, and some 6 months later, in June 1988, Argo Industries took over the work from Williamson Brothers. By this time, the completion date for the Tyee project had been pushed back to the spring of 1989. And now, the target date is a year later than that, spring 1990.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Late in the summer of 1944, a highway that hugs a river on one side and has a wall of mountains on the other was officially opened. This was the Skeena River Highway. After years of cutting through bushes and chipping away at hard rock, Prince Rupert had finally established a road to Terrace. Let us return to the archives as they discuss upgrading Highway 16.
Highways Department officials blame much of the delay in completing the project on the difficulties with Williamson Brothers contracting. The matter is still before the courts, so officials aren't elaborating. And there are other reasons for the delays.
The second contractor has been doing the best he can, but he had some problems in taking on the other previous contractor's work. He's had some difficulties of his own. One of his major subcontractors went into receivership or had some financial problems, and so that further delayed the project. The crushing contractor had a problem. So there's been a series, I guess you could say, of situations. You might say the whole project has been fairly problematic from the point of view of contractors having difficulty. That sometimes happens, and the result of that has been a series of delays.
Where that is spread out through BC.
Joe Arango knows there's been a series of delays on the highway improvement project, and he thinks he might know why there's been problems with the contractors. The work always goes to the lowest bidder, and as the saying goes, you get what you pay for.
I understand a contractor went belly up even before he arrived here. Okay, we saw one contractor move all his equipment in and move it all back out. And no one really knows why or anything, but that did happen. And, you know, if they're gonna bring in, you know, these low bids and stuff like that, I don't know, you think it'd just about save us taxpayers more money if they brought in a higher bid and got the job done right away, rather than bringing in these guys who, in this case here, haven't finished.
Bid probably too low.
I would have to think so, bid too low, and found out that there was a lot more involved than they expected.
Often what happens is a contractor will underestimate what's involved, and I think that may have happened in his case, again, because it's entailed in the court action. I can't really get into the detail of it, but it's fair to presume that, that he would have underbid.
And so why, if low bidders are often prone to underbidding, which can lead to construction problems, does the work always go to the low bid?
The province has been, in a sense, locked into the process through legislation of taking the low bid in contracts in the past. There are ways of getting around that, but there has to be a very valid reason why we go to other than the low bidder. If the contractor otherwise has put in what appears to be a reasonable bid and proposal, we're in a sense obligated to accept him at his word, unless we have other very valid reasons why we know the contract's going to fail.
While it's a fact there have been delays at the Tyee worksite because of contractors permanently abandoning the job, there's also a rumor floating around about a work crew temporarily leaving the job for a less valid reason.
This outfit here, yesterday they were not working, today they are. Just come back from their 5 days off. It's supposed to be 24 hours a day. 7 days a week to get it done. One of them had to go get married, so shut it down for 5 days.
That could be. I'm not personally aware of that. I did hear that somebody had made some statement to that effect, but as I mentioned, our holdup right now is to get the paving subcontractor. There's work for him to do as soon as he arrives, and I think that's what our prime contractor is waiting to get his paving subcontractor on site. So if the crew was away at a wedding, they may well have been, but that doesn't mean that the project is being slowed down. That's not the hitch at all.
So you'd heard that rumor too then?
I'd heard it, but it's of no real consequence.
Skeena Journal couldn't confirm the rumor. In fact, the project supervisor for Ledcor wasn't answering any questions.
I think overall we just have to say that the contractor has had a major challenge there. He's had some serious difficulties that he faced when he first took on the project. And in light of the difficulties and the complications that have occurred, I think we'd have to say he's been a responsible contractor in trying to achieve the objectives that we're looking for. So we don't have a major concern with Ledcor's approach to this project. We can't blame him for the delays. There's been a number of circumstances that have largely been out of his control that do happen occasionally.
You got the dumper up here.
Joe Arango and his fellow truckers do a lot of talking about the state of Highway 16 West. Much of the talk has to do with construction delays, but some of the chatter is about the construction itself. Riding back and forth every day over the rough road takes its toll on the vehicles, and maintenance costs start to add up.
Lots of suspension tires. True, that's a routine upkeep. It will wear out in due time anyhow. But when you have to do it every few months just because of the road, it gets awful expensive.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Pothole patching, bridge repair, snow and ice control are just some of the examples of highway maintenance contractors are responsible for. In this final segment of Open Connection, we hear some of the pet peeves of truckers.
One of the pet peeves among the truckers is the approaches to some of the bridges in the construction zone.
This spring they come in here and paved some spots to these bridges. Except they paved one side and not the other. And the other side was just as bad. Stopped and asked a person about it, and he says, well, we don't have no more money in the budget for that. So in other words, tough luck, guys. This is a nice approach. They just paved that this spring. Now the other side of this bridge here, well, that's somewhat of a different story. That's at 40 kilometers an hour, that.
On some of the bridge approaches, the pavement is several centimeters lower than the bridge deck. And although it's not a permanent situation, it's been like that for almost 2 years, playing havoc with tires, suspensions, and in some instances, apparently causing much more serious damage.
The little Bronco did lose his little tent trailer. Hit the bridge hard enough that it busted loose. Just lucky for everybody, no one else was involved.
As to why it is that way, obviously we don't like to leave it that way for too long, but through a construction zone, that's something that people will have to expect from time to time, is it's not the final condition of the approach to the bridge. Obviously, once we come in and finish the paving, that will be properly finished, and the approach will be smooth.
For many motorists driving the highway between Terrace and Prince Rupert, the prolonged bad condition of the road at the Tyee Narrows has been the biggest complaint. But of course, there have been other complaints. This past summer, a large outcry was raised after the Highways Department seal-coated a long stretch of the highway. The process involves laying down a layer of gravel, which, when embedded into the road, considerably lengthens the life of the highway. But many motorists don't like seal coating. For days after the gravel is laid down, the rocks can cause extensive windshield and paint chip damage. Joe Arango says seal coating increases tire wear, decreases gas mileage,
and more seriously, could be a safety threat during the winter.
There are ruts in this this seal coating now since they've covered the pavement with it, and it holds the water. Now we have never drove on this over here yet through a winter. Now what's going to happen when you get your rain, which we know Rupert gets quite a bit of it, and it freezes up during the night? This is going to be a terrible, terrible mess out here with lots and lots of ice.
But at the highways office, officials aren't so sure that's a valid concern.
Well, there's various schools of thought on whether seal coating is better or worse, either in a wet condition or in an iced condition. The fact that ice may form below the aggregate in the the voids that lie between the aggregate particles, that may or may not happen, but that certainly doesn't mean that the sharp pieces that are sticking up are not going to provide the traction. In fact, that is our experience, that even though ice may form, that the traction is improved because you've got that rough aggregate for the tires to grip.
Pretty well every driver who's logged as many kilometers on Highway 16 West as Joe Arango has a few close call stories to tell. A sideswipe with another truck last winter left its mark on this trailer. Fortunately, it wasn't a serious occurrence. No one was hurt. But safety is always a concern, especially when driving through the Tyee Narrows.
It is very much. Last winter was actually kind of unbelievable what had to go through here. The way the roads were in that, it was being so narrow, so much wet, sloppy snow, and then the ice conditions, it became very dangerous. Lots of accidents, minor accidents, nothing real serious, because it is such a slow rate of speed you do have to go through there.
Is that a safe highway?
I think what we have to do is look back over the 10 or 20 years that we've been doing the major work on Highway 16 West, from Terrace to Rupert. I worked in that project in 1972, and I look back here 18 years later, and I have to say it's a world of difference. We've come a long, long way. These things don't change overnight, but we're working in the right direction. And once we've finished that Kayaks Aberdeen section, we have one last major section to complete out there that we're concerned with, and then we'll have largely, you could say, a state-of-the-art highway that would see us into the 20th century.
It's going to be nice when it's done.
For sure.
Once this is finished, this is going to be a dream. It will be real nice. Not a problem there. We're waiting.
It's been over 2 years that Joe Arango and thousands of other motorists have waited, watching the slowly proceeding roadwork at Tyee Narrows.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.